Hello everybody, this is Hero back with another War Within video. We are in the 11.2 PTR checking out Holy Paladin, and do I have a crazy build for you cooked up? We are in Lightsmith, and we are canceling through CANCELAURA macros our buffs ahead of time in order to proc Infusion. That's the gameplay. Let me talk to you about what's going on here. So just as a disclaimer, this is still in testing. I'm going to try to take some of this into our heroic testing that's coming up this week. But here's the premise. When you lose an armament, you gain infusion. Now, infusion stocks have gone way up because of the buff to Flash of Light, and earlier than that, the buff to Judgment to give 2 holy power. So that now it's actually a reasonable proc. Now, the problem is they changed the proc to be 10% when you press Holy Shock. It no longer works with crit. That kind of stinks. Except for Lightsmith gets access to far, far, far more procs of infusion over the course of an encounter. In my testing, over like a 7.5 minute fight, you get something like 50 procs of Infusion of Light. That's awesome. The best part is, you can use this with Inflorescence to give yourself 2 stacks of infusion and further amplify your stuff. Now, Flash of Light got a massive index with infusion, and it's now worth casting just naturally as a healing button whenever you have infusion, in part because it's made instant cast. But with this tech, what we're starting to do is manually remove our Bulwark and our Sacred Weapon in order to manage the uptime of infusion. What do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty clunky right now in ACLS especially. You have a lot of buttons you want to press, and you don't have really enough GCDs to press them. What this CANCELAURA macro offers you is an opportunity to smooth that out. If you just press your buttons, or if you get a random proc of an armament, what ends up happening is you will gain, in a short window of time, more infusion procs than you can actually spend. So the goal here is to find a way to smooth that out and give the player back control of when they're gaining those infusion procs, because their value is very high. You can use them within a virtue window, especially in Mythic Plus if you're thinking of LS AC, which sort of struggles for throughput and has some downtime. Armament clipping will give you a chance to feed big casts of Flash of Light into your virtue windows and basically lay on hands your team over a couple of GCDs. But there's other uses as well. Instead of just going with AC and having that clunky window, you can even now play AW, which is what's going on here in this clip. What AW is doing is giving you back your 20% crit, your 20% healing, and because you don't really need to cast Judgment as much, although I'll talk about the HAA, the hammer and anvil implications of this build in a few minutes, with normal wings, you're getting a ton of extra throughput. If you can see in the footage, what you're seeing here is normal gameplay without using Judgment outside of pressing it for Awakening and filling in every once in a while, only casting more or less Holy Shocks, Crusader Strikes, and then the Flash of Lights that come with your infusion. So I'm not pressing Flash of Light to build Holy Power. I'm really only pressing it within the Infusion of Light windows. And the reason we get so many procs is just due to the nature of the interactions, which I'll show you now in our talent tree. In particular, laying down arms is giving us access to infusion whenever an armament fades from us. We can gain an armament either through Divine Inspiration or just by having more access to them in general through forewarning. But on the other side of it, we get Blessing of the Forge, which is that we're getting additional armaments during our wings uptime. This counts for both AW and for AC, but it's also produced through Awakening, meaning that you can get a lot of Sacred Weapons out just by using your normal cooldowns. These will unfortunately start to overlap, and if you press them at the same time, as I'll show you here just in the background, you can see I have both buffs running, and they're running contiguous with one another, so they're going to expire at the same time. If these expire at the same time, they will overwrite the Infusion of Light buff, which is what we do not want. And the reason we don't want that is because we're wasting valuable resources, yes, but also because Valiance is cooling down our armaments. So that's 6 seconds if you use both of the infusion procs, which is 10% of the baseline armaments. You can see here they expired and overwrote one another. Well, you couldn't really see that in the background. Notice how, because I didn't spend them, I didn't get any CD off of them. Let me just give you some here. I used my Divine Toll to get me back with our 10% chance. If I press off my Flash of Light, 8 seconds, boom, we knocked 3 seconds off. So that was 6 seconds off the armament. You can just press your macro, which I've created, just a CANCELAURA macro for Sacred Weapon, and it immediately gives you infusion, and you can fire them off again. One of the lovely things about this is that infusion, the CANCELAURA macro, can be done at any time. You can be in the middle of casting something if you want and get it. You can be preemptively looking ahead of time and seeing your spell orientation. You can be checking which buff. Sometimes you have two at once and you pick which one you want to get rid of and see that you have infusion procs. You can maybe get rid of your charges of Holy Shock to try to grab a natural infusion, and then when that does not work out, oh, here we got some, you can cancel Aura Macro to give yourself one naturally. Now, what do we lose when we cancel out these buffs? Well, on the one hand, Sacred Weapon's going to give us some throughput, but it's random, which is kind of frustrating. It does do somewhat reasonable healing. I think in general we get something like 3 to 5% out of it. In a raid setting, might be a little bit more depending on what you're doing. But in general, it's all random and out of your control where this healing comes in. So getting rid of that buff to give yourself an instant use of Flash of Light is not really that bad. Also, because of the way AC, AW work, and Awakening, combined with Blessing of the Forge, we're going to get a whole bunch of Sacred Weapon procs. So just being aware that when you're playing the game naturally, you're going to overwrite by producing a lot of casts of Sacred Weapon. So knowing that you can preemptively get rid of one before you get a new buff, or anticipating that you might get something from Divine Inspiration and clearing it out so that you can spend those infusions is part of the reason for pursuing this approach. Holy Bulwark is a different story. It gives you a really valuable buff. It's fairly heavy. It's 15% up front of your max HP as a shield. Shields are really valuable, especially in Prague. And then you get up to 20% ticking away, 2% of your max health every 10 seconds, essentially. Now, getting rid of that buff sounds like a bad idea in general, and I would agree, except I want to point out a few things. On the one hand, when you get this buff, you automatically gain the 15% right away. So you can see here I have 15%, and then as it's ticking away, it's adding that buff on. If I cancel it out, I still retain the Holy Bulwark buff at whatever it was at. It doesn't dip down to 15%. If I got to about 18% worth, it will stay at that amount and tick down. And you still get the Infusion of Light procs. So this ability to smooth and hold on to these procs, maybe Sacred Weapon's going for a while, you're using up your charges. You see here I'm casting my Flash of Lights out. I'm getting all of my charges done. I'm out. Now I have other buttons to press, yes, but say I want to gain those right now to fill a gap, I just immediately do it off the GCD and off we go and press it. But that Sacred Weapon or the Bulwark might be ticking away for 30, 40, 50, sometimes 60% of its time. The point here is you now have control of when those are coming in. And that is a significant quality of life for the gameplay. Now, in terms of talents, I've checked out a whole bunch of different things, from Veneration to Flash of Light infusions only with AC, to Flash of Light with normal wings, even to a no spender build, which I don't recommend. And I want to show you a little bit of the cast per minute so you can see in the logs what we're getting for this, because testing on the dummies doesn't always produce a reliable result as far as the healing is concerned, and I'll just show you why by going over here to Holy Bulwark, which is going off on training dummies. They have 231 million health, so 15% of that is way too much. Same thing with Holy Shock, sometimes hitting way too much due to the low HP of these training dummies. So it's not so much the raw healing numbers that I'm concerned with when I'm looking at the dummies. I can do more overall stuff in a raid setting and get a sense, but I'm looking at casts and buffs in particular. So in this version with the no spenders, this is the cast profile. I would not suggest doing this. I'm still tweaking it. The reason I was looking at it in general is because you get so many high value casts now that exceed the value of spending 3 holy power to do a WOG or a Light of Dawn. That's part of the consideration for LS. But something more reasonable over here in our cast time is this build, which is making use of Judgment and AC. And we're pressing Crusader Strike and Judgment on cooldown, so some of these buffs are being eaten up by the Judgment, which is okay. It does more absorb. I would still prefer them to be a bit more Flash of Light, but just more or less playing things normally while using Virtue gets us this kind of a cast per minute profile. And these Flash of Lights can hit pretty hard. That's one button that's useful to test out. Flash of Light actually has a reasonable profile for hits, and you're getting on average 4.24 million healing per cast for a Flash of Light, which is almost double a Holy Shock in general. Obviously not in this case because, as I mentioned before, when you cast it on a low HP dummy, it does way more healing. But the average hit at 2.62 versus Flash of Light's 4.24, quite crazy. So this is really important for me to stress. If this is the button that gives you more throughput in general, you want to try to leverage it, which is what we're doing. We're also doing that by casting Virtue, which we can basically do on CD without going as Lightsmith, both the AC version and the AW version. Although if you start to cast Judgment a little bit more, it gets a little dicier. You can still hit about 7.5 minutes to 8 minutes. Another version of this, before I go to, I'll talk about it now since I'm here. The Infusion of Light procs that you get, again, this is about 8 minutes and 48 seconds of testing. We're getting 53 counts. I had some pulls as low as 7.5 minutes that I had 50 counts. This is in part due to the Holy Shock diet that we're casting. Fine, but one thing I want to note is in a normal ACLS build, you have far, far, far more overwrites. These are the moments where I had a cast available of Infusion and I didn't spend it before something procced and gave me another cast of Infusion. My point with this is to show you that getting 50, like 45 to 50 Infusion procs and being able to use them efficiently is high, high value. Without the macro, you will see 7, 8, 9, 10 uses of Infusion go to waste, which can be upwards of 2 or 3 full casts of an armament over a 7-minute fight that you just missed out on, and not to mention all of the healing that comes from infused Flash of Lights. So that's kind of where we are going right now with these builds. As I mentioned, we're going to test it out. If you want to know how to do this macro for yourself, all you have to do is come in and give yourself 2 macros. This one will cancel Bulwark. You have to put in this so that it gives you the right number. This is the code for it. And then this one obviously is just for Sacred Weapon. You can fit these in between your casts. You can time it out. Once you get the muscle memory down, it feels really, really clean to do this. And I just think the applications for Raid, especially for AW, and for Mythic Plus for AC, I think those are the main distinctions to talk about, aside from a few other talent choices, are substantial. So we could have a build like this one for Raid, where you either take Forewarning, depending on the fight parameters, or Divine Inspiration, which I think is a little bit better. You get a few more casts of Infusion out of Divine Inspiration just because of the natural feeding of those Infusion procs through the armaments that you gain. But the 20% is pretty close. If you don't press Judgment, you can still more or less maintain a full rotation, especially if you are 25% haste or under with Forewarning because of the CDR that you're getting naturally. But this build for Raid, which leverages good uptime on Tears Deliverance, and Tears is great for us because in a Raid setting we're buffing our main abilities, our Holy Shocks and our Flash of Lights. We get Awakening in this, which does the same thing, but chiefly we're getting back all of the crit chance and the healing from this ability, which is really strong. So I think for Raid, I'm definitely going to begin here. We can even cut out some of these abilities like Holy Prism because the GCD is just so cramped, although you could put it in here if you would prefer it. It's just you really don't have the buttons to press. Whereas for something like Mythic Plus, we can swing back into Avenging Crusader, still play something like Virtue, but now with this mouse over macro, with the CANCELAURA macro tech, you can make sure in these difficult moments that you have access to burst healing through Virtue. Flash of Light is really strong into a beacon target, and this is especially good for Mythic Plus because the beacon will hit everybody, and so your Flash of Light will hit for something like 10 million, 11 million crits. Sometimes I think I had a 12 million crit somewhere in here, which is going to do a ton of extra healing for Virtue. That's the kit. I'll be testing this out. Leave a comment or some questions if you have them. Otherwise, we will catch you guys again next time.